became a career firefighter with the Howard County Department of Fire and Rescue Service, the chief of the medical division, or EMS, the unofficial historian of the Howard County Department of Fire and Rescue Services. Over 65,000 digital images and newspaper articles, magazine articles, etc. Episode 25-6, a brief history of the Howard County Department of Fire and Rescue Services ambulance service. Prior to 1915, if you suffered a medical emergency, either trauma or medical in nature, you were pretty much on your own to be able to get to a medical facility, let alone find a medical facility. In many newspaper clippings I was able to observe, there are multiple cases of individuals who were in such a predicament. A worker was injured in an explosion while blasting a path for the Elk City trolley. A piece of stone was embedded in the individual's leg. His treatment was to go to a local doctor who was able to find the piece of granite that was embedded in his leg and remove it. A child was horribly burned. Friends and family were able to flag down a passing vehicle who drove them to an area hospital where the child died briefly after arriving at the facility. Around 1915, a motorist traveling down Route 1 in the Elkridge area down a Dead Man's Curve rolled their vehicle, a Model T I believe it was, rolled the vehicle, which then landed on top of the female driver. The female driver's chest was crushed with a collapsed lung. The patient was extricated and taken to one of the local physicians for stabilization, and ultimately was transported down to Sibley Hospital in Washington, D.C. for definitive care. If you were lucky enough to be in Baltimore City, this is the ambulance that they had. A horse and a cart was the mode of transportation. It must have been rather difficult to be transported with any sort of fractures or whatever, but that was at least a luxury that you got to be transported by, quote, an ambulance. In around 1915 or so, in Howard County, Easton & Sons Funeral Home had an ambulance, and it also doubled as a hearse, but did have an ambulance service that did provide transportation from the scene or home to a medical facility. This is showing the side view of the ambulance/hearse that was used to transport patients. I'm assuming sometimes there's a conflict of interest as to whether or not to quickly get the patient to the hospital or slowly get there where the patient expired and just take him back to the funeral home. That's just speculation on my part. During the same time frame, the Maryland State Police did have an ambulance that also doubled as a paddy wagon. In fact, the primary function of that particular vehicle was to function as a paddy wagon to transport prisoners to the jail. In the event that a trooper was injured, one of the troopers would go back to the headquarters, pick up the unit, drive it to the scene, pick up the trooper, and then transport them to an area hospital. In June of 1938, Savage actually acquired an ambulance, first ambulance in Howard County by my records, and that went into service and functioned out of the original fire station in Elk City. You can see an overlay of the original ambulance and the original station in downtown Savage. Also during this time frame, in the late 40s, early 50s, Maryland State Police actually had a series of ambulances that were stationed throughout the state of Maryland and that were able to transport patients, primarily motor vehicle accidents, from the scene to a definitive hospital. And these are several examples of such vehicles that were in service that transported individuals to area hospitals. In 1953, the Elk City Volunteer Fire Department actually purchased a DeSoto ambulance. That was one of the first ambulances in Howard County after Savage and ran out of the Main Street Elk City station. A side view of the ambulance, you can see how the patient was loaded on the passenger side of the vehicle. The passenger door open, the rear passenger door open, and the center post was folded up, and the stretcher could be loaded in the ambulance and transported to the hospital. A rather unique situation. Around 1955, Clarksville was able to purchase an ambulance. I believe it's initially a Chevrolet ambulance, noted as Ambulance 55. And you can see a couple images of that unit sitting out in front of the original Clarksville Volunteer Fire Station. An image showing the chief of the Laurel Rescue Department presenting to the chief of the Savage Volunteer Fire Department the keys to an ambulance. I believe it was a Cadillac ambulance that they could utilize in place of the vehicle that we originally saw. Savage had a series of ambulances, as you can see. They even in 1962 had a manual speed ambulance that they utilized for several years to transport patients to area hospitals. Ambulance 65 was a Cadillac ambulance that you can see, both a close-up and also sitting outside their fire station. Around 1966, the Elk City Volunteer Fire Department replaced the DeSoto ambulance with a 1966 Pontiac Superior ambulance that was in service for about 8 years. We can also see at the Elk City Volunteer Fire Department over by the annex, 2 ambulances that were in service when I started as a volunteer. When I started as a volunteer in 1968, there were only 3 ambulance companies in all of Howard County: Ellicott City, Clarksville, and Savage. And they were responsible for responding to the majority of Howard County. There were several ambulance companies that had first due in Howard County: Mount Airy, Sykesville, Arbutus, and Jessup also had some first due responses in Howard County. The Ellicott City unit that I was talking about, the first due ambulance, their primary ambulance was a International Carryall. The one that you see to the right, ambulance 26. The backup unit was a Chevy Carryall van also that was doubled as a chief's car and could be utilized as a backup ambulance. Around 1969, the Elk Ridge Volunteer Fire Department purchased an ambulance, and the picture here is just showing the original individuals who took the highest level of training at that time to be able to ride the ambulance, and that was basic and advanced first aid with CPR certification. Around 1970, the fire station at Station 7 Banneker opened up, and the original ambulance that was there was a Cadillac ambulance. Actually, the person standing in front of it is Kent Berg, and that was the ambulance that served the Columbia area for several years. Headroom in the ambulance was somewhat limited, but it sure looked nice and it could go real fast. Around 1970, the Lisbon Volunteer Fire Department was able to purchase a unit, a Schwab unit, that they placed on service, and that would service the western part of Howard County. And this is just a side view of the same unit, ambulance 45. The West Friendship Volunteer Fire Department certainly had a series of units that they operated with great pride. This is a 1974 chassis with a Schwab body on it that they ran as a first due unit. And in subsequent years, you can see a series of pictures of other ambulances that they utilized to transport patients within the 3rd District within the West Friendship area. Just an image showing 1 year of service. Actually, the first ambulance was appears to be a Cadillac ambulance that was purchased on January 1st, 1969. And that particular year, they actually ran, looks like, about 210 calls with that particular year. Just again, a series of pictures of the West Friendship Volunteer Fire Department and their first purchase of an ambulance, Cadillac ambulance, back in January 1st, 1969. Just an image of the Elk City ambulance, ambulance 26, with patient being loaded into the vehicle. On the right is Marty Lepore, and on the left is Jimmy Jett, fender bender near Centennial Lane and Route 40. Elk Ridge had a series of units. This one, about 1980, they had started an ambulance service in the late 60s, 1969-70, and they continuously progressed and upgraded their units. This is a unit out of Bethany Station, more quote modern unit. On the right is Ronnie Huffman, on the left is Mark Richards. In 1980, the Howard County authorized the purchase of a Suburban that was to be outfitted with a full complement of BLS and ALS equipment. The Lisbon Volunteer Fire Department personnel were able to outfit it, building shelves, etc. And this unit would become, at that time, my staff vehicle, but also would be utilized to cover much of western Howard County in my off-duty hours. And the unit was identified as Medic 1. This was one of my less than glorious moments. I got Medic 1 hung up in a sod field, sunk it down to the frame, and it was not my best moment. Please use your remaining heartbeats wisely and not waste a single precious one.